at 2714 Georgia Avenue Northwest. If you're ever in Washington, D.C., avail yourself to coming to the center of knowledge, peace, and life. I so much enjoy this bookstore, and know Dr. Lusane does too. So, happy birthday to your publication, Dr. Lusane. And Clarence Lusane and I have been friends for quite some time. You're a frequent guest on WPFW, as the intro indicated. I often want you to round things up when we go through political seasons, and I'm so happy that you've done that. It's a great pleasure to have you here and to interview you. I consider it a great privilege. I know your book comes out of this community, the community across the street, Washington, D.C., and the African diaspora. For that, you should be saluted. $20 and change, Harriet Tubman and the ongoing fight for racial justice. So, to give our live stream listeners a better sense of who you are, we'll get into the book shortly. But as you heard, Dr. Lusane is presently the interim chair of the political science department at Howard University, where he also directs the international affairs program. He's an author, an activist, a scholar, a lecturer, and a journalist. And for more than 40 years, he's been writing very actively in national and international affairs, particularly with a focus on human rights and anti-racism, and the engagements of the diaspora. I think those are the three important prongs, if I've gotten them correct, friend. U.S. policy certainly plays a role, and you've been a keen observer of all things international. And my point of pride is you're a very well-traveled person. You've traveled to 75 nations, and it's not just fly in, fly out. You spent considerable time doing field work in such areas as Bosnia-Herzegovina, Brazil, Cambodia, Colombia, China, Cuba, Germany, Guyana, Guadeloupe, Ireland, Japan, the Netherlands, New Zealand, North Korea, South Korea, I think too as well. Yeah, Pakistan, Panama, Rwanda, South Africa, Switzerland, Turkey, Ukraine, and Vietnam. That's just only naming a few of the countries. In addition to your scholarship in global relations, you've been an international election observer in Haiti and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And you spent 2.5 years in London doing research on racism and human rights in Europe. It doesn't surprise me when you talk about all these connections to Germany and Italy and such. And you've taught on several different faculties at several different institutions. But one of my pleasant encounters with you was, I don't think it's just from academia, I think it's because of your reputation. You were the co-chair of the Civil Society Committee for the U.S.-Brazil Joint Action Plan to eliminate racial discrimination. So without further ado, because we could go on for quite a few more minutes, Clarence, again, thank you for being here, and I thank you for the hardy work that's reflected in your book.
So, thank you, my friend. I appreciate that introduction. Just a quick story. I was giving a talk one time with my grandmother. It was the first time she really heard me talk, and somebody was giving this long introduction. And so I was feeling all big. And so my grandmother looks over to me and said, "Seems like you can't keep a job." So she wasn't all that impressed. She was like, "You gotta focus." So I was trying to explain to her, it all kind of connects. But thank you so much, David, for being here. As David mentioned, we go way back. We've been in many circumstances where we try to elevate, educate, elucidate, indicate where we are. And so that's what this book is about. It's a book of, at least I try to make it a book of the moment. And that also links into why being here at Sankofa is so meaningful. In addition to just loving the people who work here, loving the owners, loving that it is, as Michaela said, a Black space in circumstances where these are shrinking. It also is a bookstore. It also is a place where knowledge is produced, debated, exchanged, shared. And so I think that's, again, what I try to do as a writer is to put it out there to be shared, to be discussed, and to be engaged. And certainly it doesn't have to be in agreement with me. What I try to do in most of my work is actually present what are the different sides. And as we'll talk about tonight, on a number of issues, there are different sides that need to be discussed. But I think where we all agree in this environment, in our community, is that we have to push forward. We have to challenge the issues of our day and carry the spear and the banners of our ancestors.
So, $20 and change. We in the mass media and in the general public have been fed notions that we should always find out origin stories. After reading the book, I suspect that the origin story is a full and robust one. Can you tell us what got you started on this particular enterprise? And then I'm going to slyly interject what it is and what it's not about.
Right.
Give your answer.
So thank you for that. So in 2015, it was announced that Harriet Tubman would be put on the face of the $20 bill, replacing Andrew Jackson, and that on the $10 bill and the $5 bills, there would also be changes. This was, from the administration's perspective, this was during the Obama time, an effort to be more inclusive, to be more diverse. That, of course, automatically set off knee-jerk reactions from conservatives who very much understood the power of image, the power of symbolism, and that Andrew Jackson represented a particular type of identity for conservatives and those who want to push back on the furthering the rights in this country. And so that seemed to me then an opening for discussion. Like all of us, I grew up knowing about Harriet Tubman, but I wanted to do a much deeper dive. And what came out of it, from my perspective, was not only looking at her life after the Civil War. If you look at the movies, many of the works about her kind of focus on her helping people escape, but sort of stop there. But in fact, she led a full life. She lived to be 90. She worked on women's rights. She worked on voting rights. She worked to help people who were poor. She worked to help people who were disabled. All of that was what made Harriet Tubman. And then to me, I also reset my view of her as someone who was at the core of a genuine democracy. And the subtitle of the book is Harriet Tubman and the Ongoing Struggle for Racial Justice and Democracy. I think you had earlier version where the democracy part wasn't mentioned, but that's critical because in the US, the question of democracy is intimately tied to the question of racial justice, just as the thrust towards authoritarianism is tied to the issue of racism.
So you were saying that if we trust, again, kind of the mainstream practice of history, of media, just the way people tell the story about us, people of the African diaspora, but particularly our leaders, such as Harriet Tubman, the stories often stop short. She's the Moses of our people. She's taught to us usually by our parents and kinfolk. If we are involved in any extra family organizations, often there'll be a mention of church. And the stopping, comes from her liberation of our people, the actual physical liberation. You may hear about her prevailing over disablement. She was attacked in a store by being conked on the head with a heavy metal object that was tossed at her. Soon after, she was a mystic, and there's much given to that's informative, but it's just another way of telling a short story and truncating her. What is the important? You've already given us an introduction to the idea of at least other modes and ways of being, her actions. What is it that you want us to remember in background?
So thank you for that. So the title is $20 and change. So the first part of the book is really looking at the discourses and arguments and the debates about Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill and taking Jackson off the $20 bill. You know, what did he actually represent? But the other part of the book is the and change part, and that's looking at where we're at this moment and how do the issues that are confronting our communities resonate in a deep, deep history in this country. So, for example, the story you talked about Harriet Tubman being ill. So there's a chapter called from 1619 to COVID-19. And what that chapter does, it looks at the issue of health in African Americans in racial politics. So when COVID emerges, all of the ways in which Black people are discriminated in the health system, from not being given adequate seriousness when people came in complaining, to ideas that Black people don't have as much pain can take pain much better than white people. All of these kind of very deeply prejudiced ideas, all of that emerged. But that is rooted in a long, long history. Harriet Tubman's injury, which disabled her for her entire life, where she would have seizures, she would often pass out literally in the middle of a sentence. And again, framing that, given all that she did. But that disability was not hers, that was a disability of a racist slave system. And that carried from generation to generation to generation to generation. So you can't really understand the crisis around Black healthcare in 2020, 21 to 2022 without looking at what happened in 1619 and kind of going forward. So Harriet Tubman again embodies and gives us the opportunity to really see a long range of issues and how she fought back and pushed back on all of that.
And it would be fair to say that she modeled not a sense of self-diagnosis as much as self-care. She was informed about the medicine of her time. She made informed decisions about that. And she modeled it around others. So it was like a demonstration model. And this is a theme we'll often see with her, particularly with her philanthropy and not just liberating people, but what comes after.
But as you said, also she was a healer. So she was a nurse during the Civil War. She had many contributions during the Civil War, but that was one of them, which I think you're right, it directly comes out of the life experience that African Americans developed to do their own health. Well, self-help was the only health that became available. And she took that skill, as so many people have done, and made it a community skill.
That notion we'll hold on to, but the important thing that you adroitly emphasize, and by the way, there's not a word wasted in this book. The content, the momentum, the continuity, it's very inviting to the reader. That's going to be one of my many urges in this hour, to get people to, again, investigate $20 and change. You mentioned this model of nursing, and if our knowledge of Harriet Tubman is expansive, we know that her mind was brilliant. Her actions were decisive. So spying, scouting, being a military tactician, it's again a model of that study, the life of the mind, the use of the body, the accompaniment, the collectivity of others. These are all things that she magnified. This daughter of Dorchester County, about 2 hours away from Washington, D.C. in Maryland. I guess there are two other things, with your permission, before we depart on the biography part of Harriet Tubman, that I think are very important. The name Charles Noley is a very important name because she modeled the reality for many of us today that there is a place for public protest. Can you just tell us a little bit about the relevancy of that? And just so you can have more continuity, the Combahee River raid is certainly important and leaves us an important legacy today.
So Harriet Tubman was engaged in direct action. That was her middle name. And so she sometimes found herself in circumstances where she had not planned to be there. She was doing something else, but she jumped into a immediate leadership. And there's a circumstance where there's a black man who was going to be sent back into slavery. And Harriet Tubman and a crowd of black folks said, this ain't gonna happen. And they went to war with the local police and the local sheriffs, grabbed the dude, they kind of got away, they jumped in the boat, went across the river, got him again, and with the police and helped the dude escape. And again, Harriet Tubman was about 5 feet tall with a disability, but nobody messed with Harriet Tubman at all. There are just lots and lots of stories of that. But as David points out, one of the really defining experiences was the Combahee military venture. This was during the Civil War. She was asked or maybe suggested that there be a raid on the Confederates along the Combahee River going down in South Carolina. And she led 3 boats, about 300 soldiers under her command, and they went down and they went and targeted Confederate stronghold after Confederate stronghold. They ran away. They rescued about 700 enslaved people, brought them all back.
And none of the soldiers died.
None of the soldiers died. She did not lose, just like during her helping people escape from slavery, she did not lose a single person. First woman, black, white, or otherwise, to lead a military expedition. But she knew the land. She knew what she was doing. She led that. And again, we're talking about someone, and at that point, she was in her 40s, right? This was not a 22-year-old full of energy. This was Harriet Tubman in her 40s leading this daring raid because she needed to do it and she wanted to do it. So it is an amazing character that even as much as we love her and know her, every day you kind of more and more admire and just wonder at how she was able to kind of push through.
And one friendly and wonderful reminder right at the outset of the book is the Combahee River collective statement. If black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free. This is the person we're talking about. This is the person that we take pleasure and pride and extol.
So let's really underscore her importance in the suffrage movement and in black women's rights. Because if you look at the movie Harriet that came out, there was an early movie with Cicely Tyson, there have been others. They tend to stop at the Civil War. And so they kind of don't deal with the full arc of her engagement. So she was there on these issues. She was at the first meeting of the National Black Women's Organization, whose name I don't quite remember right now, but she was there.
And Shiloh, was that the one in Shiloh in 1896?
It was
yes,
in 1896.
in
Yes.
July.
Yeah.
She attended the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs.
Yes,
Which
that
was
was in Shiloh.
it was the consolidation of black women's clubs. She was there. Right.
Five
Yes.
different
Groups
African American.
combined.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I
at that
just came
point,
up off the bench in basketball.
she was in her 70s almost, I believe, at that point.
Yes.
But she also was engaged with the other side of that movement, white women who were involved in the feminist movement. But just kind of to show the importance of that, which I wrote down, when she was literally dying in 1913. She was on her deathbed. There was an important march coming up in Washington, D.C. This is a very famous feminist suffrage march that was taking place March 3rd, 1913. Harriet Tubman's lying on her bed, dying. She's talking to Mary Talbot, who was one of the key Black women activists, one of the founders of the Niagara movement. And there was controversy because the movement, that demonstration, that word had gotten out, they wanted Black women to march at the back of it. Black women said, we're not having it. Ida B. Wells came and said, I'm marching where I feel like marching, so y'all just deal with it. But for that march, Harriet Tubman said, tell the women to stand together, for God will not forsake us. This was like about a week or so before she died, right? So she was engaged literally down to her last breath and saw the importance of that march, saw the importance of continually to push for women's rights, for Black women's rights, for voting rights.
With that, also out of that meeting, particularly the DC chapter of the National League of Colored Women, the phrase lifting as we climb comes out of that meeting, just to give a historical reference. So we're at a transition point, because knowing your work as I do, the constant theme of your writing is freedom and democracy, freedom and democracy. The acknowledgement that Black people, among many people of this earth, are fully human. And with that, it's very apparent that she leaves a legacy. But I want to take a momentary transition bridge here. When I first knew that you were working on this project, and as I said earlier, it comes out of community, that you're in relation with other historians, political scientists, writers, but also good friends in many different professions. There was a working title that included Andrew Jackson, nicknamed Old Hickory, right, for those who either have a disdain or an affection for this president or former president, of course, that represented everything that the United States was at in the society she was contending with, that would deny her humanity. So we've talked about this biography. We've acknowledged the immediate title of the book, $20 and Change. It's not about Jackson and Tubman, but about the contrast you use, centering her, of course, but that you use this contrast. And the irony to the $20 is she was due $20 in her time. Can you explain the weird synchronicity of that?
Yeah, so one of the ironies, and perhaps you can see it as a justice. She, as we talked about, she worked during the Civil War. She was a nurse. She was a cook. She helped clean. She was a spy. She did kind of everything, and she wasn't volunteering. She was under contract. They had said, "We need you to do this." She said, "Yeah, okay, this is the deal." After the Civil War, she deserved and wanted a pension. They gave pensions to Confederate soldiers. The folks who tried to overthrow the country were getting pensions.
Yeah.
Right? So she said, I need a pension, which was actually very perceptive, because she preceded another woman named Kylie House, who later would organize Black people who had been enslaved to fight for pensions. Am I right, Greg?
Yes, sir.
And so Harriet Tubman had vision like beyond belief, right? And so she fought, but they denied her the pension, in part because they said, we cannot believe this Black woman did these things. We cannot believe she led some military.
Even though white people of stature attested to everything that you mentioned.
She had letters
from the Secretary of State, the Secretary of War.
Which she was close to, actually, one of the Secretaries of War. And so this was a decades-long fight. It didn't get resolved until like 25 years later or something like that. And it ended up being an act of Congress. They decided they would pay her $20 a month. So it comes around in a circle. But $20 is also important, of course, because of George Floyd. And what kicked off the George Floyd incident was $20 bill. And I keep this $20 bill because I cannot spend it. I went to a CVS, they put it in the thing, it didn't work. I said, oh, okay. Then I went to a 7-Eleven, they put it in the thing, it didn't work. But I didn't die over it. Right? I took my $20 and said, what the hell? But over a $20 bill, George Floyd gets killed. Right? So there's we've got to take advantage of these moments, which of course people have, as explanatory in the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And again, my focus again is really driving home that someone like Harriet Tubman is really, when we talk about democracy, the genuine deal versus the Fox of Andrew Jackson and others who really do not have, even at that level, democracy that's inclusive of all of us.
So try to do a bridge for you, being mindful of our time. One of your earliest chapters just talks about the nature of money in the United States. And it actually talks about the physicality and the actual commerce of the money. And I want to give you an opportunity to say in full that symbols are not mere symbols at times. They convey a sense of representation that's not mere representation. So when we deal with these encounters that try to beautify to a disgusting degree what actually happened under the system of enslavement, this witness of the money speaks to us. Can you tell us why?
So symbols are important, and one way we can acknowledge this is not only who is opposed to certain symbols, but who's defending certain symbols.
And why they're defending them.
And that tells you all you need to know when we begin to challenge these expressions of power. And so for money, the images are telling a narrative. They're saying whose story is important, whose story is not, whose image is important, whose image is not. And one of the things I talk about in the book is there was a song put out by the Last Chorus, which was one of the rap groups from the 1960s, where they do a whole song about the symbols on the dollar bill. And they just deconstruct bit by bit virtually every image that's on there to tie it to that this is intentional and deliberate. There is no accidental design of currency. It is very much tied to ways in which certain people see power and see relations. We saw this during the Civil War when the Confederacy created money. It was trying to create its own country and whatever, so it created certain bills. Those bills, for those who still think that it wasn't about slavery, those bills had people who were enslaved on the bills being enslaved, right? So they were absolutely clear what that project was about. So when we look at who are the images on the bills and on the U.S. currency, that is a story, that is a narrative. And while 2015 became a juncture in which there was opposition, there's a long history. And people had been speaking out, women have been speaking out about the gendered nature of it. People of color have been speaking out about the racial nature of it. So it didn't start from the top up and then was sort of laid on people, but there had been a long, decades-long history of recognition by people who needed to do the recognition that that ain't us, and that ain't telling the full story of what the nation claims it's about, and it needs to be included.
And just to amplify what you offer in the book, no group of color has done well by this enterprise of making money, or in the sense of printing it or coining it. You really do spend a lot of time talking about the notion of this nation. There were these like nanoseconds, actually more, where you had images of a possible multicultural, multiracial democracy, which was deliberately stamped out by white power brokers. The whole image of liberty, a fairer, a rare term that a light-skinned white woman, eliminating the initial thing of Colombiana,
Right.
which was a more reflective of native, nondescript, multiracial woman. And even on top of our nation's capital, that original woman that was on top of the Capitol was First Nations rendered, and white politicians made sure that that would not be the case, and so on and so forth. So with this desire, you have two different American enterprises, and you quote Dr. Du Bois about this. How do we see these two different Americas with the emphasis on where Harriet Tubman wanted to lead us, with the emphasis on trying to have just a plain old, absolutely resolve that we're all fully humans in this, particularly Black folk who contributed so much to this nation.
So, so this is a permanent struggle in the sense that there are going to be these very different visions about what society should be and where it should go and who should lead it, who should benefit from it. And part of understanding history is teasing out those who have been on one side and those who have been on the other side. That's why all these books here, right? This is why we have Howard University, right? Because that is an ongoing struggle for that clarity. And so, our contributions are to revisit for all of the generations, because when we look at each generation, we have to go over these, right? Because there's always the pushback. There is no accident that the attacks on the 1619 Project, the attacks on critical race theory, the attacks on intersectionality, all of these are very much linked to not just the symbols of power, but to real power. And so we cannot at all afford to not engage at every level of that confrontation. And for me personally, I talk in the book. I put in personal stuff. One of which is about my grandmother. My grandmother lived to be 101. She was active in the civil rights movement in Birmingham and Bessemer, Alabama. She marched with King and John Lewis on the Pettus Bridge. There were 3 marches. She was on all 3 of those marches. She was at the meeting where the civil rights movement had a discussion with Malcolm X. Right, so family lore, these stories were told. We were kids, but we were hearing these stories, not quite sure who these people were. But as we got older, it became clearer and clearer what the significance was of her risking life and limb to be part of that struggle. And her admonition to us is, you have to have a life of service. Whatever you do, you have to give back. And this is what she carried well and deep into her 90s. So I ain't really kind of have a choice, to be honest, that this is what, I was bred in. And certainly, again, try to not only breathe in my son, but, in my students and elsewhere.
Well, thank you for $20 and change. Harriet Tubman and the ongoing fight for racial justice and democracy. I'm checking in with our host here, and I'd like to open up to both the people in the bookstore and on our live stream if you have any questions for Dr. Lusane. Any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
I want to know where this book started for you. Like, what was the impetus? Where were you when you first thought, okay, yeah, this is about to be a book and a journey I'm about to go on?
And the question for our folks on live stream is, again, would you restate the impetus for the book? Where was your head at to get this project started?
So that's an excellent question. So this was probably about 2016 or so, when around the end of 2016, after the election, and it was clear that there was about to be a dramatic change in the national profile. And all along, there had been a more and more explicit racialization of U.S. politics. No more dog whistles, no more subtleties. This is like straight up, this is where we're going. On the night of the election, you had people in Washington, D.C., who had come in to celebrate, who were saying, yeah, we've taken the country back. White men are now in charge again. And so that was, for lots of us, disturbing. And I'm not sure, David, if you were, on that election night, we were all at Busboys Accords. We were doing live broadcasting.
Yes.
And it was devastating because people were starting to see the returns. So that really was kind of the turning point that, I've got to say something. I got to speak out on this issue because this is, we're headed down a really, really dark road. And so, and the question was whether or not the $20 bill with Harriet Tubman was going to actually even be killed. And so part of it was trying to do an end run and to get into that discussion because of where I think everything was going. But the book went in directions I had not planned because as I began to read deeply about Harriet Tubman, I began to read deeply about money. I read 10 books on money, which I had never thought about reading, but just kind of how money systems evolve and all of that. So then it became clearer and clearer that I really want to push the debate of Harriet Tubman as a democracy advocate. That she wasn't just about racial justice and gender justice, but she really was on the cutting edge of the moment that we need. So it kind of grew out of that. Yes, sir.
Could you describe, is there anything that you could talk about in terms of like her activities during Reconstruction? You know what I mean? This moment where like Black people were taking office in unprecedented, numbers. You mentioned that she was involved in like getting people, to vote and stuff like that. And I'm just curious, like, where was she? What was she up to? And if you know anything about kind of like, about, when it was eventually just, like violently overthrown, like, 1896, like South Carolina, massacre and stuff like that. Like, if she had anything, any of her activities around those moments.
Yeah, if I can repeat the thrust of the question, Dr. Lusane is being asked, what were her particular actions and responses through the Reconstruction and into the Nader, unfortunately term, the Great Redemption, as far as how people talk about white supremacy, retrenchment, and terrorism. What was some of her actions and responses?
So she struggled financially. So that drove a lot of what she could and could not do. So she had helped her parents escape from slavery. Initially took them to Canada, brought them back to New York. And she had other relatives that she was very much spending time with, even as she was still traveling, speaking out. In that period, I think she increasingly saw the need for finding a way to help poor people. And so she begins to conceptualize this idea of a place where people who were poor, people who were elderly, people who were infirm could come. And so she met with friends, she tried to raise money for it. Eventually she was able to do it. But she began to kind of move in that direction, even as she's participating in these various efforts by the women's organizations that we talked about going forward. But she kind of kept her militancy. When she opened up the Harriet Tubman home, one of the rooms she named after John Brown. Right, John Brown, as many people know, was a white man who attempted to spark a slave uprising in 1859 in Harper's Ferry. That was crushed. Harriet Tubman was probably gonna be on that, but then there were circumstances came up, and she absolutely was not opposed to it, right? But she remembered John Brown, and she saw him as important historically. And so she continued, as much as she could with the challenges she had. But Harriet Tubman didn't, she never became rich. She wasn't going around giving, book tours and, speaking engagements and getting thousands of dollars and all of that. So she really struggled, but she had, David mentioned earlier, close friends, powerful friends, who would help out.
Frederick Douglass. The
Stewarts who were in the Lincoln administration.
Yes.
So she had people that she was close to and had people who knew her. Even Du Bois writes about the importance of Harriet Tubman. By the time he's doing this, she's in her late 80s, early 90s. But Du Bois is like, this woman is important.
And the Soul of the Black Folk came out with her lifetime. I just want to mention that as a reference.
So,
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Question from Dr. Greg Carr in the back.
Thank you. Thank you, colleague, for this work. Following up on what Brother Ferrari raised it when you said she needed a room in her house with John Brown. In terms of how would you kind of think about her, I hate to use the word philosophy, but attitude toward the possibilities of human society, particularly how much emphasis she put on being very spiritual. At a time when, like I say, Garrison and them are like, let the country dissolve. Maybe it should just dissolve. John Brown's like, let's arm these people and do it. And like I said, she wasn't opposed to it. Delaney leaves the country, comes back, joins the military. How would you characterize her not only as an active worker for a better society, but as a thinker in history? Were her commitments to something larger than even a notion of the United States? Or how would you place her in that constellation?
Yeah. Excellent question from Dr. Greg Carr for our folks on live screen. With your allowance, what is the Harriet Tubman-led future? And in fact, the brother speaks to it expressly in his book. Dr. Carr acknowledges that she's a thinker and a doer, and she's a woman of action, and she formulates institutions, not institutions in that everyday commonplace sense, but institutions that really help people. What was her vision for the future? The future of again, multiracial, free democracy in which Black
Future human society. Not talking about United States.
Future human society.
Exactly. That's good.
So she was deeply spiritual, and that really kind of guided her. She talks about it from the time when she escaped slavery, 1849, that God got her through this. But she also had a grounded spirituality. So God got her through it, but her parents had been part of the Underground Railroad, so they got her through it as well. And so she always kind of linked those, the reality with, very, very deep commitment to justice. She, for example, did not meet with Abraham Lincoln. Sojourner Truth did, Frederick Douglass did. Harriet Tubman was like, dude ain't right. You know, he ain't answering all the stuff that we need to be getting done.
She also knew betrayal. It's not uncommon knowledge that among abolitionists and the suffragettes, and I use that term very specifically in this case, the white women who were wanting the vote, some of them were stone cold racists. In fact, Susan B. Anthony's protege and the person who took over from her, Carrie Chapman Catt, said, I didn't know Harriet Tubman. Now, Harriet Tubman had given speeches at their national.
Yeah, they just Harriet big time. But there was a falling out between the Frederick Douglass side of the suffrage movement, because he supported suffrage and he was there, and the Susan B. Anthony Candy side, because the 15th Amendment. And Frederick Douglass said, look, when they're starting to kill and lynch and do all of the horrible things to you all that they're doing to us around voting, then we got another discussion. But this is absolutely essential. And Harriet Tubman was in that space. That is exactly where she kind of saw herself. And she, as the movement of Black women grew and consolidated around abolition, around women's rights, around voting, she was there. And again, on her deathbed, you know, of all of the things that she was thinking about, one of them was, you guys got to be out there, you have to be strong, you know, keep it moving forward.
Moving forward. To our host, do we have some more time?
We do. We have, we can do another 15 minutes.
Okay. Oh, we can do another 15 minutes. That's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. To the brother with his hand raised.
This is Brother Oduno. I would like to thank both of you and WPFW and definitely Sankofa. I'm particularly interested in the safety nets for social reconstruction through the homes, not only that she put together, but that was an inspiration to other club women. Excuse the first person singular. Some of us, as Dr. Lusane says, I came out of the Darkest Community Center, club women. As Dr. Carr mentioned in terms of society's wider development, or what is the relationship with what Harriet Tubman did put on the ground with what we call the Colored Women Association, including what most of us in the common era would call the Dorothy Haithian or the Mary McLeod Bethune in terms of the National Council of Negro Women, the inspiration of that, and how is that to be fertilized coming from the kinds of things that Harriet Tubman did as a practitioner of social justice within her own community, though inspiring other communities to do even greater for themselves, for families.
I'm sighing with joy at this question from the audience. I wish some folks from live stream could have heard you directly. Next time I'll rush a mic over to you. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the question goes as follows. Given the institutions and efforts that Harriet Tubman established, the practical, pragmatic actions that she took, coming out of, and may I add, sir, that Black women are just as active in spirit and in effort and in creativity and intelligence today. So we see that model going on still. But your point is, beyond legacy, how does she influence the other safety net institutions for our people, and how can we utilize that influence today?
In particular, when we say NCNW, though people may not see Dr. Dorothy Irene Height and her crew at even beyond the March on Washington, but they impacted upon it right to this very day.
So what really strikes me as powerful in reviewing this history is the solidarity among Black women that was there at every juncture along the way. For example, the brother mentioned Reconstruction. So during Reconstruction, Black women did not have the right to vote, but Black women organized the vote in the Black community. Election day was a holiday in the Black community, and the sisters were out there. They made those brothers go and vote. They were there. At the turn of the century, you get this circle of Mary McLeod Bethune, Ida B. Wells, all of these really powerful voices that are united in an intersecting understanding that gender and race and class had to walk hand in hand. And when they moved on this, they moved as one, even as they were moving separately. And you see this with the rise of the Niagara movement that Black women were central in. You see in the rise of the NAACP and the Garvey movement that Black women were central in. And this evolves all the way through to the Third World Women's Alliance that comes out of the Civil Rights Movement, the Come Back He Collective that comes out of this period. So there's an ongoing kind of echoing and bonding that gets reflected and in this really just powerful support networks that the sisters have kind of through all of this. And to me, Harriet Tubman is in the mix of all of that. She's deeply respected, right? When she speaks at this event, she's introduced by the daughter of Frederick Douglass, right? So there's that, constant kind of linking and understanding that, we're here for the long journey and, we all have to be here together.
A number of things come to mind from the book. This important connectivity that you're talking about. Tubman commanded not just mere audience, but results. Like when she knew full well that when folks escaped to the north, for instance, they had to be skilled, but they had to have their own agency, their own priorities. So these schools that taught basics, whether it be home economics and wash or trade or what have you, it wasn't a rote thing for her. And that's something that you emphasize. That is, and she, one of the highest compliments in African tradition is to say to someone, you speak truth. She was direct, frank, and really didn't suffer bureaucracy in the sense that we know it.
She didn't suffer fools either. So she did not play.
Do we have another question from the audience or from the live stream?
Okay, so I want to know, what do you think, if Harriet Tubman was to materialize right here, and we told her it was 2022, what do you think her first question would be about maybe the status of Black people, or just in general, what do you think her first question would be?
If Harriet Tubman was here, right with us in 2022, what would be her first questions, her first observations about the state of things for?
Or just her first question. What do you think the
What her
first thing
would be?
Yeah, I think she would want to know where we're at. Have we met her dream of gender, race, class, equity? Because that really was, on her mind. This is, when she didn't give, they're not books of speeches of Harriet Tubman. She didn't just do that. But when you read what she actually did, this is what was on her mind, right? That we have to be a better society. We have to be committed to that. So I think this would be her question. So, what the hell have y'all done since I died? Make this happen. And, we pull out the list of, what we done, haven't done.
And she probably would be strategic, right? She would probably not hold back on what might be effective and what we could do. I think she'd be pretty direct about that.
I do too.
I think we're at the end of our hour, if I'm not mistaken. I'll just do a last call. Okay. So let me remind people that Dr. Clarence Lusane has presented us with another good work. And pardon me. And we've been situated this evening talking to you from Syncopa Books, 2714 Georgia Avenue Northwest. That's across the street from Howard University, in the heart of Washington, indeed the heart and mind and spirit of Washington, because of the community it serves, and it serves it well. Dr. Lusane, I really thank you. I, just kind of sheepishly said, there's not a single word wasted in $20 and change. Harriet Tubman and the ongoing fight for racial justice and democracy. My thanks to City Light's book for being your publisher. When somebody stops at Syncopa, they can find that and a number of other titles by you, including, importantly, I'm trying to think of your book in the White House, and I don't want to. Black History of the White House, as well as $20 and change. My thanks to you. My thanks to Michaela, the staff of Syncopa Video and Books.
Absolutely.
And I wish you a pleasant evening along with getting the book. It's available in the store and online. Again, thank you, Dr. Lusane. Thank you, Syncopa Books.
Thank you all.